Hello, my beautiful friends. Welcome back to True Crime Wine Wednesday. If you're new here, hi, hello, welcome. I am Sherilyn and I'm so glad you found me. If you're not new here, welcome back. Thank you for joining me every single Wednesday. You know I love and I appreciate you so much. You have truly changed Wednesdays for me. I look so forward to them. I just love and I adore you. So thank you for bringing so much happiness and joy in my life and being here to support me. We're getting right into it today. Before we do, I have a quick message for you. Before we get started, I want to give a huge thank you to today's sponsor, Care Of. If you don't know what Care Of is, it is a subscription service that ships personalized vitamins, supplements, powders conveniently to your door every single month. You know your girl loves something showing up at my door every month so I don't have to go out and get it. Basically, you take this short in-depth quiz about your lifestyle, your health goals, and you get a personalized recommendation from them on the supplements that would work best for you, taking out all of that guesswork, which is what really appealed to me. It's always something that I've just wanted to do and start just having better routine, form some healthier habits, have, some of those supplements that I'm lacking in my diet or my lifestyle. And I just never really knew where to start. And even when I try, I get so overwhelmed. I don't know about you, but I don't mind taking quizzes, especially if it's going to help me get to a goal. So I have fun just doing the fun little quiz. And it was so cool to find out at the end what the recommendations were. For me personally, might be a little bit of TMI, but I've been having a lot of issues with digestion. I don't know how to explain it. I guess I was just feeling kind of bogged down. I just wanted a little bit of boost. So I just didn't feel heavy after every meal, if that makes sense. So that was like top of my list of what I wanted to get help with. I also wanted to get on a good daily vitamin routine. So I took the quiz, got my recommendations, and I was so excited when it came. It comes in this adorable little package, very nice and organized, sits off to the side in my kitchen because that's where I know I'm going to take it every day. And every single day you have this cute little individual packet, which is made of plant-based compostable film. Got your name on it, you open it up, take your little vitamins, and that's it for the day. Plus, I like to travel. How convenient and adorable to just pull your little packets, toss them in your bag. You don't have to worry about them getting all tangled up, trying to remember if you took this one on this day or whatever. It's effortless. I'm obsessed. They also come with a customized booklet so you know exactly what you're taking, what its benefits are, and why that specifically was picked out for you. If you want to check them out, you can get 50% off your first Care Of order. Go to takecareof.com and use my code Sherilyn50. Once again, that's 50% off your first Care Of order. Simply go to takecareof.com and use my code Sherilyn50. I've also made it super easy for you to just click the link in my description. Thank you again so much, Care Of. All right, riddle time. I got a riddle today. All right, the riddle is, what goes up but never comes down? All right, today's story starts on April 22nd, 1980. There's some road workers who are doing some water damage repairs on this lonely stretch of road in northwest Indiana. And they come across what looks like this almost 5-foot long handmade plywood box in the ditch. They bring it up to their truck. They have a crowbar, so they pry it open. Inside, they initially just see a bunch of old clothes kind of crumpled up. There's this old quilt. They start to poke around and move some items around, and underneath they discover a skull. They call the police, and when police arrive, they discover almost full skeletal remains are in the box, except for they see it looks like the lower portion of the legs have been cut off and are missing, and it appears that this was done so that this body could fit in the box. No identifying documents were found, but it did appear that the remains belonged to a woman or maybe a very small petite man. It wasn't quite small enough to be a child, but based on the clothing that was in there, there were bras, dresses. They were leaning towards identifying a woman. Forensics quickly confirmed that it indeed was a woman. She appeared to be between 20 to 40 years old. And going off of bone structure and the condition of her teeth, it's believed that she was very beautiful. But in the area, there was no missing women reports that fit the circumstances, so she became known as the Lady in the Box. Several weeks go by and there's still no leads coming in after they've announced that they have found this box and these remains. So they decide to give her a proper burial, but they do keep some of the evidence in terms of the clothing, the blanket, the remaining leg bones, and the skull. She was laid to rest in the township of Morocco in Oakwood Cemetery, and locals became very invested in identifying her. There were many people who would even travel to come and see her grave, leave flowers on it. But it wouldn't be until 20 years later, when a woman in New Jersey named Fran Smith went missing, that the Lady in the Box would be identified. Betty Gladden, who went by Fran, was born on August 4th, 1942. She's described as vivacious, even at a young age. She had this twinkle in her eye, show-stopping quality about her. She loved to be social and keep busy. She joined all the clubs she could at school. She did modeling, had lots of friends. She was able to make friends quite easy. Fran grew up moving often because her dad was a soldier, so she got used to having to say goodbye to some friends, keep in touch with them, and then comfortably make new ones. She married twice, but both marriages ended in divorce. However, she had 3 children, and that was her greatest joy and accomplishment in life. She had settled in Houston, and that was close to where her daughter and her grandchildren were. But when her son was shot in battle and her grandmother's health started to deteriorate, she made the decision to move over to Florida to be around both of them and help take care of both of them. This was really hard on her daughter and her grandchildren, so they made the decision that her grandchildren were going to come each individually to spend a year with her. Her granddaughter came first. She was already so close to Fran, but obviously, coming to live with her in Florida, that bond became even more strong, and she also got to build a connection with her uncle who was out there, as well as her great-grandmother. Out in Florida, she got a job at a company called Chromalee Technologies. She was an executive assistant, and it was at work that she met a man named John Smith, who was an engineer and a self-proclaimed Mennonite bachelor. John was born April 2nd, 1951 to Grace and Carl Smith. When he was 3, they had his brother Michael, who he grew up quite close with. Their parents separated not long after Michael was born, and the boys moved with their mom to live with their grandparents Chester and Ethel in Seville, Ohio. The scenario sounds a little bit morbid, but the kids had a lot of fun. They lived next door to a funeral home, but no one in the neighborhood really thought anything of it because this was all they knew. They would just be playing out in the field behind the mortuary. One thing John really liked to do was ride his motorcycle and also tinker with and repair cars at his grandfather's gas station, which also had like a garage shop in it. The Smith boys were described as your all-American typical boys. The boys' grandparents were a staple in their community. It was a farm town of about 3,500 people, and they ran the town gas station, and it sounded like it kind of acted as like the hangout spot too, with everybody of all ages. The kids would be there having ice cream and candy, and the grown-ups would be sitting outside watching them as they played, having their coffee, just, shooting the Allegedly, John was the favorite. More specifically, he was his mother's favorite. Nothing he did could be wrong. He had, I guess, the classic awkward kid look. Very stick thin, white as a ghost, bowl cut hairdo, chipped tooth, kind of like a sideways smile. Very Lloyd Christmas, I think, but he was more redheaded than brunette. He was very athletic, though. He won a lot of awards in track, and he was well liked among his peers for the most part. He had told Fran his life was pretty much quite typical. There wasn't anything specific that was eventful that he could share. Like I said, he mentioned to her that he was a lifelong Mennonite bachelor, implying that he had, not really been in any serious relationships prior. But after dating only 2 months, John decides on this whim while they're at the beach that they should elope. Fran wasn't overly keen. She had already been married and now divorced 2 times, so she wasn't really in a rush. But John convinced her, just go with it. Let's live life in the moment. And right then and there, they went and found a justice of the peace and got married in the sand on a whim. She and John kind of seemed like a little bit of an odd couple. She was very beautiful, this former model. She continued to take a lot of pride pride in her appearance, and John was kind of Dilberty, still gangly, had the hack job hairdo, terrible sense of fashion, couldn't be bothered, kind of loud and obnoxious. But Fran had this thing about liking the underdog, quirky personality. At first, things were great. He was very funny and easy to talk to. They even built a house next door to Fran's mother. But Fran's mother didn't care for John. She never really elaborated on it. It was just something about him that she didn't trust. And she was right to feel that way. He was a full-blown sketchball. For example, out of the blue one morning, he goes to work, normal morning, gives his wife a kiss goodbye, and like an hour later, there's a knock on the door and she's served with divorce papers. She calls him at work and she's like, WTF, what's going on here? And I guess he just says, oh yeah, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. We'll talk about it when I get home from work. So he comes home from work, they talk about it, and then he just dismisses the divorce proceeding and they move on. Things seem to be back on track, but then a couple months after that, he loses his job. He does quickly get rehired at a manufacturing company, but this is all the way in New Jersey. It really wasn't something Fran wanted to do, but there was that voice in the back of her mind that she didn't want to get divorced again for the third time, so she was going to try to do what she could to make it work. So in 1991, the couple moved for his job, but quickly it caused some troubles. Not only just because Fran wanted to stay out in Florida with family, but she started to notice that little things he was kind of secretive about. It started off very mundane here and there, but then she figures out one day that he owns a house in Connecticut and he never told her about it. He plays it off like, well, I didn't really think it was a big deal. I've had the property for a while and my sister rents it out. And then she realizes more she thinks about it. She doesn't really know anything about him because she didn't even know he had a sister. She really knows nothing about his family, nothing about his friends. So she's asking these questions. He's kind of blowing her off. And then one day she comes home to the condo almost completely empty and realizes he just up and left. There's no note, nothing. The whole situation made her feel very uncomfortable. It's then that she realizes she's really vulnerable to him. She didn't really think much of it, but he didn't want her to have a job. He just gave her the impression that, oh, I just want to take care of you. I make enough money. Why would you work? So she had no financial independence. All the credit cards were in his name. All of the bank cards and accounts were in his name. She didn't even have cards to use. He would just withdraw the money and give it to her almost like an allowance. They even had a storage unit out in Florida for the things that they didn't end up taking with them to New Jersey. And she had no idea where her things even were in Florida, which storage unit they were even at. She makes the decision there that regardless of whatever happens between her and John, if they're able to talk and work it out, she needs answers and she needs to be put on some of these accounts and have some independence and freedom. She waited to talk to him on the Monday because this happened over the weekend. So she figured I'll call him at work on Monday because that's where he'll be and we can talk about what happened. And she calls his office and he just picks up like, oh, hey, babe, how's it going? She's like, well, not good, John, obviously. He tells her again, he's so sorry. He made a mistake. He just needed to get away, clear his head, but he's gonna come back home. She says, okay, but then they have that conversation where she wants to feel more included and have her name on the accounts. She wants a key to the storage unit out in Florida. She wants to get her own job and she wants to see this property out in Connecticut. He says, yeah, absolutely. As soon as things slow down at work, they're really hectic right now. We'll go out and do those things. We'll get your name on everything. In the meantime, though, he thought that it would be a really good idea if they took a honeymoon because they had never taken one. And he thought, okay, this will help us get back on track. It ended disastrously, though, when she was getting out of the bathtub one evening and she slips on the floor, breaks her hip, and had to have surgery. She was bedridden for weeks and the isolation really took a toll on her. Not to mention she already wasn't wanting to be in New Jersey away from her family. Now she felt even more trapped because she's just stuck in bed. One thing she did make sure to do to keep her positive and her spirits up was to communicate with somebody in her family every day, whether it be her sister, her mother, her daughter. And it did help, but she made it clear to them that the whole situation was not very good. She wasn't happy with the fact that she was bedridden, and it made her realize even more that she really wasn't happy being away from them in New Jersey. On September 28th, 1991, Fran spoke with her daughter and she let her know she was doing the best she could to be a little bit more mobile. She couldn't move around too much, but she was working on small sewing projects that she could work on for just 20-minute increments and then go and rest and then get back to it. So she told her that she was going to head to the fabric store to get some more fabric on some ruffle little quilt set she was working on. And that conversation with her daughter was the last time anybody spoke with her. Her daughter had tried calling her every single day since that last conversation, knowing she can't go anywhere for very long. She's supposed to be at home healing. She tries to be patient and not overthink things, but by the third day that she hadn't spoke with her mother, she calls John at work. First thing she says when he picks up is, "Where's my mom?" And he says, "I thought she was with you." Her daughter's like, "Me? Why would she be with me?" John said he came home and she had left a note. It was something along the lines of, "See you in a couple days. Don't forget to feed the fish." And based off that, he just figured she went to go and visit family since she was talking about coordinating an upcoming visit. Instantly, her daughter's panicking because this makes no sense. She knows that she can't even sit for longer than 20 minutes because it's so painful. She couldn't see her driving or getting on a plane or doing anything like that to go all the way to Texas. Plus, she hadn't even spoken to her about it. For the next 2 days, she calls John every day, trying to jog his memory for more clues. She asks about the note and if he still has it, and he said he didn't even think anything of the note, so he threw it out. And she's getting really upset because he seems very aloof and unconcerned. Her daughter talks to her aunt, her mom's sister, and they decide they're going to tell him, "We're flying out to look for her. We're going to file a missing persons report. You're clearly not concerned and there's an issue here." And his reply was, "Your mom is going to be really upset when she gets back and finds out about this. It's obvious to me that she's just using this as personal time to get some space, and now you're making it a public matter." And basically her daughter was like, "I don't give a F, John. I'd rather upset her by looking for her than not and something happening." He basically says, "Very well, don't come, I'll file the report." And he officially filed one at 10 p.m. that Friday. He stated to the officer that on Tuesday, October 1st, he came home around 7:30 from work and he saw a note that said, "I'll call you in a couple days. Don't forget to feed the fish." Like he told her family, he said he wasn't very concerned because they had spoken about her going to visit her family, so he just assumed that's what she had done. But her family called in to speak with the officers once a file was opened up on her, and they said there's no way she did that. First of all, she would have told them. Second, Fran's mother was going through some really severe health issues. She had emphysema, and at the time, she was in the hospital on a ventilator, so they couldn't see her leaving her mom's side. Her car was also still at the house, so they're like, did she just call a taxi? Did she hitchhike with somebody? How'd she get to the airport? How did she supposedly get to Texas? Nothing was adding up, and a week later, the police went to the apartment to talk to John again. This time they ask a little bit more about the marriage. John says it's great, even though he just up and ghosted 2 times. And then the officer started to notice just little inconsistencies. At first, he said, "Okay, well, do you know maybe how much money she had on her to see how long she could survive out there?" And initially John said he thought she only had about $2,000, and then he upped that to, no, she could be okay for a while. I think it was around $2,000. He was subtly uncooperative, I guess I would say. When the detectives wanted to have a photo of her to share with the public, he said that he didn't have any recent photos of her because she was camera shy. And to them, maybe that made sense because they didn't know who Fran was, but to everybody who knew Fran, that didn't make any sense at all because she loved the camera. She did modeling. When you look at photos of her, you can see she is very confident in front of a camera. When the detective asks him, "What do you think happened?" he just sticks with what he's been going with. He said she's out visiting family in Florida, even though they're all like, "No, bro, she's not here." The detective does follow up with that possibility, though. He reaches out to all of the cab companies, the local bus drivers, the airport. Nobody had Fran as a traveler. He lets about another week go by, pops in for another visit to John, and this time he learns that although he proclaims he's this lifelong bachelor, Fran was his second wife. He had been married to his high school sweetheart years before. He said there wasn't really anything eventful about the marriage. It was short-lived because they were very young and impulsive. Despite that, he said that it ended amicably, and the last time that he heard from her, she was heading out to live in a commune in Florida. Her name was Janice Hartman. Janice and John met one evening when they were both 16. They were at a house party and John was showing off his motorcycle outside and she had a thing for motorcycles. From there, that kind of sealed the deal and they became a thing. Janice was born March 2nd, 1951 to her parents, Betty and Neale Hartman. She grew up on a farm in Doylestown with her two brothers, and 10 years after she was born, a little sister also came along. Janice is described as always dancing. She had this fun, sweet, bubbly personality where she would just be prancing and dancing around the house, playing music on her little record player, totally in her own little world. She and her siblings also grew up very close. They played on their swings and in the sandbox, and they did everything from climbing trees to helping their mom can vegetables. It sounds that they had a lot of fun traditions. During the winter, the family would go skating on their pond and ride sleds on the property. And being the sister of two boys definitely gave her an edge. She was not a pushover. She got into semi-trouble one time for beating up a neighborhood kid who was 8 years old because I think he was being a bit of a bully, and Janice stuck up for herself. But when the other mom called her mom and said that her child punched her son and needed to have a talking to, her mom asked what child, and she said Janice. And so that conversation they had was pretty much along the lines of, okay, you can't really do that, Janice. Let's not physically assault people. But in the back of her mind, she was kind of like, you go girl, sticking up for yourself. When Janice was young, her parents got divorced. I guess it was a really bitter divorce, but it did teach Janice that women could be independent and they could financially provide for themselves. In school, she got really good grades. Math was her forte. Fully unrelatable. She was a beauty, but she wasn't a debutante. She had a rebellious side. She took up smoking, liked to go to parties, which, like I said, is how she and John both met. When her family met John, they weren't really sure what the appeal was, but everybody said, I guess it was the motorcycle. He treated her well. He courted her, took her out to do things, bought her gifts. After she graduated, she went to move out to St. Louis to take training to be a stewardess, but her and John kept in touch. And one day when he came out to visit, they just eloped at City Hall. The guy likes a spontaneous wedding. Both parents on both sides were not fans of how everything went down. Janice's family didn't really get the best vibes from him. They thought he was one of those talkers and didn't really have a lot of follow through, so it's not what they wanted for Janice. And John's family was so upset that they eloped because I think they expected to be a part of it, especially his mom, because they were so close and she clearly favored him and I think thought she would be involved, but she was so hurt that she locked him out of the family home. After their elopement, they moved to Columbus and John went to Ohio State University to study engineering while Janice held down the fort and paid all the bills by managing a gas station. There was quite a bit of tension in the house. Janice felt a lot of pressure keeping things going, and it kind of turned into quite a bit of a resentment because whenever John had free time, he'd go off and kind of go MIA, do things that he wanted to do, and she figured, okay, if you have enough of this free time, you could get something casual, part-time to help with some of this financial pressure. Janice's mom said that Janice confided in her that the arguments were escalating to the point of them getting physical. Although Janice would also fight back, the situation wasn't okay. One evening, Janice told her mom that he said, if you leave me, I'll kill you. And weeks after saying that, she told her mom that she filed for divorce. On August 17th, 1974, they signed separation papers. Janice moved to her dad's mobile home in Doylestown, and John moved in a mobile home in Worcester. Things seemed to be amicable, but Janice would notice that he would show up to places that she was. Sometimes she was cool with it and they were really friendly. They'd hang out. She even told some of their friends they get along way better now that they are apart. And then there would be some times where she was just kind of wanting to chill and she'd get annoyed that he was there. Janice was in a time where she was really enjoying her independence. She bought this Mustang that she was super proud of. She also got a job as a go-go dancer. She loved dancing. She was never nude, but it wasn't something that all of her family agreed with, but she was enjoying herself. On November 14th, she and John officially signed their divorce papers. They divided things evenly. There was no issues, and she was feeling really excited about the future. That night, she went out to celebrate with one of her girlfriends, but after she dropped her friend off at home, she was never seen again. Now, when Fran's family finds out about Janice, and the situations are similar and sketchy, they're like, WTF. No one in Fran's family, Fran, didn't even know about Janice. And it turns out the more they're talking to people, they realize not only did his work friends also not know about Janice, but they didn't even know Fran was missing. He never told anyone. At one point, he even went on this business trip with a close colleague of his, and he's in his tight quarters hanging out with him a lot and doesn't mention it at all. When people started asking him questions, it seemed like he had different explanations depending on who he was talking to. Some people he stuck with she's visiting family in Florida, even though no family in Florida had seen her. Others, he had told that she had come home and she's fine and she's just at home. And to some people, he said that she was dying of cancer. It got to the point where Fran's daughter and sister were feeling very helpless not being in Jersey to meet with the detectives face to face, form that kind of connection. So they came down and John offered his and Fran's house while they were there. And they decided to accept, even though they didn't trust John, but they were together, had each other's back. People knew they were there. The detectives knew where they were. And they wanted to use it as an opportunity to snoop around while John was at work. Sure enough, the first day that he leaves, they look around and they see all of her things are still there. Only one dress is missing. And one thing that really stood out to them was she had this favorite hairbrush that her grandmother had given her, and she just loved it. It was one of those things like no other hairbrush. They don't make them like they used to. Nothing could compare. She wouldn't leave anywhere without it, and it was in her bathroom. They also found her 2 yellow suitcases that were stashed behind in her closet when there should have only been one, because John told everyone that one was missing, and that's why he thought that she had gone to see family. By this point, he's definitely a suspect in not only her family's eyes, but also the detectives. Unfortunately, there's just not a speck of evidence. Their tactic with the whole thing is just keep on keeping in touch with John, because it seems like every time they speak to him, they learn something new. So sure enough, they go and visit him and they learn more about this property in Connecticut. He had told Fran that this was a property he had that his sister stayed in, but he tells detectives that he had rented it out to a friend of his for about 8 years, and her name was Kathy. They head out to meet Kathy. Turns out Kathy's not Kathy. She's a woman named Sheila. She had been living there for 5 years, and she's been his girlfriend for the past 5 years. Sheila admits that she knew John was married, but she was still in the process of trying to accept that because she had not known these past 5 years. He had actually just been there to visit, and as he was walking out the door to head back to New Jersey, he turns around and says to her, "Oh, by the way, I'm married and my wife is missing. Talk to you later." So she's stuck through the emotions of, is this real life? Who is this woman? Where do I stand? How long have they been married? She's under the impression that they were in a full-blown committed live-in relationship. They had met while they were both working for the same company. They quickly moved in together in her apartment, and then 2 years later, he bought the home that she was living in for the two of them to live in. They had 2 dogs. They went on vacation. She knew his family. She thought he was it. She did say that the past couple years he hadn't been home much. He was taking a lot of jobs out of state, but for the most part, he was home almost every single weekend. I know there's a lot of people who feel in those situations when somebody's living a double life. You're like, how did you not know? How didn't you see the signs? But in these situations, first of all, if your relationship seems very healthy, loving, you don't really allow yourself to go to anywhere but that. So if your spouse is off working during the week and then makes the effort to come home and see you every weekend, you feel lucky that you still get to see them. Can you imagine finding out that they're off living with the week wife and then coming home to the weekend wife? What a life. Sorry. Now that all these secrets are coming to the surface, Fran's family has this feeling like they need to get in touch with his first wife, Janice. They start calling every person with the last name Hartman in the phone book in Detroit, but nobody knew a Janice. Then they started with people in Ohio with the 216 area code, and eventually they get to somebody named Gary who answers. They ask him if he has a sibling named Janice. He says yes. They ask if she was married to a John Smith. He said yes. She was in the late 60s. And they're like, oh my gosh, this is her. Can you please reach out to her and see if it's okay if we have her contact information? And he just says, she hasn't been heard of since the 70s. Not long after separating with him, she disappeared. Her family had also long suspected John of knowing what happened to her, but like in Fran's case, there was no evidence to move forward, and eventually the case went cold. Now, with Fran's family reaching out and telling detectives, okay, he's connected to another wife's disappearance, Janice's family had this whole new hope for answers. Detectives on Fran's case find out that there was a missing persons report filed by John for Janice. It was a very confusing report. Her whole file was very hard to read. John had said the two of them had actually been together after signing this divorce paper on November 17th. They went to a bar. He said her friend Kathy came to join up with them, and also another man named John. John, her ex-husband, said he left. As far as he knew, everybody stayed. Kathy said she was dropped off by Janice at her house a few hours later, and that was the last anybody heard from her. John also talked about an assault that had happened on Janice a few days prior to her going missing, and suspected that might have something to do with her disappearance also. There was an incident report filled out by Janice, and it's awful. I just want to give a trigger warning for sexual assault and attempted rape. On the early morning hours of November 10th, 1974, Janice showed up to a police station completely disheveled and beat up. She walked in reporting that several men had just attempted to gang assault her. She said she was on a date with a man named Leonard at the time. They were at a bar, and around 2 a.m., some other guys at the bar had invited them to continue drinking at a house nearby. Janice and Leonard said they would come, but they were going to go and get a little bite to eat first. So they did that. Arrived at this house at about 2:40 in the morning. At one point, someone came up to the couch where she and Leonard were sitting and told her to dance, which she said, no one paid me to dance. So he said, okay, well, I'll pay you. She started dancing, and then they said she needed to undress. She didn't feel comfortable getting undressed. She never danced in anything less than basically an adorable little bikini set. But she agreed to take off her sweater and then just dance in her dancer style bra that she still had on underneath. At one point, one of the men came up and grabbed her, and she said, stop. And a minute later, in front of everybody, he just attacks her and throws her to the ground. Several other men joined in and dragged her to a bedroom while she was trying to crawl away. Multiple men tried to assault her but were unable to because she was struggling so much. She fought for her life. She bit several of them. At one point, she was able to get away a little bit, and then she was pulled back, and someone came in the bedroom with a shotgun. It was at this point that someone screamed, "Don't kill her," took the gun away, gave her her clothes, and she was able to run away and go to the police station. Since no charges had been laid prior to her disappearance when she went missing, this investigation stopped. Her family had done everything they could to have all angles looked at. They wrote letters to senators, congressmen, the FBI. They hired a private investigator, but they always got the same answer, that there wasn't anything that they could do. With Fran now missing, Janice's case was finally reopened. Detectives decided now they wanted to go talk to John's family, because when they're going through all of these reports in Janice's case, it didn't seem like any of them had been interviewed, but they quickly realized nobody wanted to cooperate except for John's brother Michael. He spoke with the detectives at the family home, and just as they're sitting down, and Michael says there is something that he would like to share about Janice's disappearance, his grandmother bursts through the door and she starts screaming, "Don't you tell them anything." Right there, the interview ended and they had to leave with nothing. At the end of the day, the detectives knew that the best way that they were going to form a case was to have a body. So they sent out a letter to every coroner in Ohio giving a description of both Janice and Fran, hoping that there may be some unidentified Jane Does out there. Unfortunately, they didn't hear back, and John just kept on trucking with his life. At one point, he moves back home to go and live with his mom and his stepfather to work their very lucrative real estate business. When his stepfather passed away, John became his mom's right-hand guy, and he was doing really well for himself. Years and years are passing, but the detectives are keeping him in their sights. Even though they can't move forward, they want to know where he is. Even though he is trying to move on, everybody else's life in Fran and Janice's families is at this standstill. Their mission is to find them. Sadly, Fran's mom passed away from emphysema. She was only 65 years old and she was on a ventilator. And weeks before she passed, she would still write on the chalkboard that she used to communicate Fran, and then just have tears come down. Just broke my heart. It's for the family members that the detectives never gave up. It wasn't until 2000 that John Smith was arrested in Escondido, California, where he was living with a third wife. It all came together in May of 1999 when the detectives went back to John's brother Michael, knowing that there was something he wanted to share with them. He agreed to come and have a conversation at the station, and this time they kind of started to chip away at him by focusing on the different treatment that John got than he did. They really hammered in how they could tell, even just by being detectives and talking with John and family, that he was favored. You know, he's the head honcho of this real estate mogul, while Michael was the handyman who just fixed up the homes and received a much smaller salary. And just by poking at these things, it worked. He said the night Janice disappeared, he actually dropped John off at the bar that Janice and her girlfriend were at. John had invited him in as well, but he wasn't really feeling it, so he just dropped him off and left. And he said he knew nothing about a disappearance. The story John told him was that the last time he saw her, Janice was going to a drug treatment center. They're like, nope, that's clearly not what happened. They felt like he was trying to almost remove himself from the situation. They could sense it was almost like he was scared of getting in trouble, so he abruptly ended their interview. They're getting closer though, and now they know he's got this third wife who they've got to go and talk to because they don't want anything happen to her. And they find out she has been living in complete oblivion. No idea who the man sleeping next to her is. Her name is Diane Beasley, and they met again, like he loves to do, at work. She says she wasn't interested in him at all, but he was very persistent, and it just got to the point where she caved. After only 3 months of this whirlwind romance where he was just spoiling her, whining, dining her, getting her gifts, they get married on September 5th, 1998. She says she kind of went along with it because she saw him as a good way to be financially secure in her life for once. And I mean, her lifestyle took a 180. She was dripping in jewels. She had a nice house. She had a Ferrari. Just living in this bougie ignorance, and then gets a knock on the door from the detectives and finds out who John really is. She said she knew that John had been married before, but said that his wife Fran had died of cancer. She didn't even know about Janice. She didn't really have any information in terms of giving them any leads, so they leave her with all of this to process and give her a warning to protect herself. That night, Michael had a nightmare. It was about Janice. He said she came to him. She was young, beautiful, but she's holding these severed legs and just hitting him with them. He wakes up his wife and says, "We need to talk." After they do, she says, "We need a lawyer." They went and hired one, and Michael's lawyer contacted the detectives. It's then that they find out that Michael had been living with these nightmares since 1974, just weeks after Janice disappeared. Michael said one evening the family was having a get-together at their grandparents' house, and John was missing, and he went and found him in the garage. And he said he found him building this oddly shaped plywood box, and he's like, "What are you out here doing this for? Everybody's in watching the football game." And he said he just needed to build it to get rid of all of Janice's things. He doesn't think anything of it. 5 years go by and they never spoke about the box. It didn't go missing or anything though. It stayed in his grandfather's gas station for those 5 years. Then in 1979, Michael's grandfather's cleaning out the garage and he calls Michael to come get rid of the box. Michael picked it up and he's curious about it. So he brought it home and he opened it up. Inside he sees all of Janice's clothes in it. He starts moving things around and he sees Janice's remains, and that below her knees, her legs appeared to be cut off so that she could fit in the box. He freaks out. He brings their grandfather to his house to show him what's inside of it. And he says, we have to call the police and tell them. And allegedly his grandfather said, no, it will kill your grandmother. So they called John at work. They said, hey, we opened the box and we saw what was in it. And he just said, all right, I'm on my way. John came to Michael's house. He picked up the box and he left with it. When they confronted John about it, he said that one night he was drugged by 2 random guys. He said he found out that they were FBI agents. He passed out and then he wakes up and he's in this warehouse and Janice is dead on the floor in front of him. They told him, we're going to frame you for her murder. Next thing he knows, he falls asleep again and then he wakes up and he's back in his trailer and Janice is there too, dead on the floor. He said he panicked. He threw her in the car to try to figure out what to do. He left his house, and as he was peeling away, he could see these police cars with their lights flashing, and they're pulling into his driveway, ready to arrest him, but he had already escaped. So he knew he was being framed. Michael knew how it sounded, but he made himself believe it so he could still have his brother and not go there and not believe that he was responsible. He stayed quiet all of those years, fearful also of what was going to happen to him because he did see her in this box and he was told not to say anything. Unfortunately, he had no idea where the box was, but he agrees to record a conversation with John and try to figure out where he left it. During this phone call, they have a little bit of small talk. He says that there's pressure being put on him from the police and it's unbearable. Michael's like, you know that box that we found at Grandpa's? And John's like, oh yeah, the one with the goat in it? He's like, tell me they're not going to find that box in Seaville. And he's like, oh no, they won't find it. Not incriminating because he's trying to imply that there was an animal in there. But it was a start. So they make a plan that the next time John calls Michael, he's going to tell him that he received a subpoena and that he has to go and testify and he can't take the pressure now. The next time John calls, he's freaking out. He says in 2 weeks, he's got to go to court and he has no choice but to tell them what he saw in the box because he wasn't going to go to jail for him. And John was like, yeah, okay. Michael said, unless you have a better idea. And John said, no, I don't. He did try to say, I mean, that was somebody trying to mess with us. That wasn't Jan in the box, Michael. And Michael's like, it was Jan. Her legs were cut off. I saw her. Shall I go on? And John was just like, no. And Michael just unloaded. He told him that he had had nightmares about Janice ever since then, of her chasing him with her legs. He's never, ever forgot about it after all of these years. John just keeps saying he doesn't know what to say and that he knows that he needs to do what's right for him and hangs up the phone. That night, John went rogue, ran away from home again. Diane was worried about him because she's still not fully convinced the detectives are being honest with her. She doesn't want to believe it. But a couple days later, he calls her from his office and he says he needs to be picked up. When she gets there, he says that he had been missing because some FBI agents had held him hostage in a hotel and wouldn't let him call anybody. It's hard to even say out loud. He should have been a writer, really. Where do you come up with this stuff? While they're driving back, she confronts him about what she's hearing about this box. And he says there was a box. It just showed up on his doorstep one day. He never looked inside of it, but he wanted to get rid of it. So he drove it out to a field and left it. At this point, she's like, he's lying. I'm sure the whole FBI arrest hostage situation was really a big eye-opener. The good thing is she got there, and in December 1999, she files for divorce. Now, when he gets the divorce papers, he rushes to the house, kicks down the door, and she said she had never seen this look on somebody's face before. Just completely unhinged, not the same person she had known. He was like, how could you do this to me? And her daughter happened to be there, which he didn't notice at first. And when he does, he quickly, just like a switch, calms down and starts acting like everything's calm. And he's like, I just want to talk, you know, like, what's going on? She tells him to leave. Now that he knows that there's a witness there, he leaves. The frustrating thing though is, again, like, without a body of at least one of his wives, they can't move forward. So the detectives send out another letter to all of the coroners, and this time they have the information about this box. The Wayne County Sheriff gets this letter, opens it up, and can't believe it. 20 years earlier, he was a deputy that had responded to this call of this woman found in the box. He picks up the phone, calls the detective, and he's like, I think I have your girl. It turns out it was Janice. DNA was finally able to bring her home to her family. And the lady in the box, who this whole town had taken as their own, finally had a name. The day that she was exhumed to compare DNA and identify her was actually on her birthday. It wasn't until October 3rd, 2000, between getting DNA, pulling the case together, getting an indictment, that John was finally arrested while he was at work for the murder of Janice Hartman. At his trial, John's brother testified and shared the same story that he did with the detectives. It was extremely compelling, and John was sentenced to 15 years in prison. In November 19th, 2019, he was finally indicted for the murder of Fran, and in October of last year, 2001, he was offered the plea deal of a lifetime, I would say. He was offered 20 years for pleading guilty to her murder. Those 20 years would be served consecutive with the 15 years, meaning that he would be eligible for parole in 2029, but he hasn't responded, and that's just sickening. Like, the control and the manipulation that he still needs to have, the pain that the family has to continue to go through when you're virtually not even getting an extended punishment. Sorry, I'm just slapping my mic about. I just can't. There is the belief that there could be more victims out there. His wife, Diane, had found photographs of 2 women among his belongings. They were released to the public to try to identify. One woman was, and she was alive and well, but the other, as far as I know and I have looked, has not been identified. This is her photo. At the end of the day, I just hope he does the honorable thing and brings some closure to the families, especially when this offer for peace for Fran and her family would basically not even affect his sentence at all. It doesn't make sense. All right, that is it for me today. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It means the world to me. I love and I appreciate you so much. Answer to today's riddle: what goes up but never comes down? And the answer is your age. Your age goes up, never goes down. Unless you're Benjamin Button. Or no. I mean, his age just kept going up, but he just kept going in reverse. So yeah, still applies to Benjamin. All right, I'll see you in the next video. I'll miss you terribly. Until then, make sure to love each other, love yourself, and I will see you soon.